Welcome to Watercolor Wednesday. My name is Cathy Futral. We're the group from Church of the Palms. However, today we're outside to do a watercolor of this lovely tree and its background, and come join us. A couple of weeks ago I was out here in this beautiful park, the Arlington Park here in Sarasota, and I was looking at the tree here and did an acrylic painting plein air. Today we're going to do a version of the tree in watercolor. So here's a couple of things you need to know when you're working out of doors. You have to be very portable. I'm using an easel today so you can see what I'm doing, but the truth is I would sit down, I would hold my board in my lap, I would have something as simple as a little watercolor set like this, a pencil, a couple of brushes. My water is in a container on the ground, and I also have other little portable paint sets that I like to use. And this one I travel with quite a bit, but I'm using this bigger one today because I have more area for puddles. So any little portable set you have is great for painting on location. Here we go. I'm going to sketch first, so I hope that you will be able to see this paper. I am looking at the tree. I'm going to begin with some of the negative spaces as I look at the tree. I might want to simplify the tree just a little bit. And what I mean by the simplification of the tree is that I want to not do every single branch and every single limb, but the majority of what I see. Okay, what's interesting to me and how it fills the space. So this is a negative space, but it's also broken by another limb that comes and moves across the space. So that becomes something in the background. Whenever you're doing a landscape, you have to think quite literally of foreground, middle ground, and background. So in this particular composition, I have the base of the tree, and this is what we call the foreground, this area. What becomes the middle ground would be anything that pops up in the background behind this tree. So when I'm doing a watercolor painting, I often like to do my composition this very simple way. It is the tree first, and then what's behind the tree. So that's my watercolor approach today with the tree. Now there are lots of other ways of working, but because we're starting with the tree, then it's the subject of the painting. All right, so I'm continuing with the sketch. It's almost as though two trees grew together, and you can combine the two as one, or you can, adjust these things as is your artistic license. You notice that the tree is not directly in the center of my design. So I'm also not going to do those palmettos all the way across. On second thought, maybe I will. Yeah, that's just a decision you make sometimes. Does it need to stop there? And maybe it does, because I want the path to be part of this feeling, and the ground is not that far up. Actually, I probably need to make the path more like that, and this will be the area for that light green where the light is coming in. I choose not to put all these other trees in here as far as the branches, but what I do want to do is suggest this background of foliage in these bushes because they catch a lot of light. And this will be my background. The sky and these trees are called my background. Now, to begin this painting, and I think I want to go ahead and do that because I'll do a lot of my detail with my paint and texture and that sort of thing. So to begin with, I want to create, well, I feel like I should put some of the background in first. Absolutely. So I'm talking myself into working different than what I just said. So I'm going to begin with water, and because that tree is darker, the water I'm applying is for the sky, okay? The tree is darker, so I can just put my sky in right on top of this, and that makes a lot more sense to me than to try to labor between the branches later. All right, so water is applied so I could do a wet and wet. Now someone pointed out, boy, you're gonna have trouble with this on it, because typically I want to have this flat when I'm doing something like a wet and wet wash. And it would be best if I do not worry with the, sorry, oh, where was I? Oh, blue, with a touch of purple. Now, one thing I have to admit is that when I have painted outdoors before, anything can happen. My first painting outdoor experience was with, in North Carolina. No, that was not my first. Yeah, the first was in snow, because our teacher decided we should go outside, and it was snowing and we froze to death. My second or third experience, I'm doing a large oil painting of an old mill out in the middle of nowhere, and while I am doing so, something crawls across my feet. And when I looked down, it was a snake, yes. Another time, now I painted a lot outside, but
what about the snake?
The snake, it didn't bother me.
It didn't die.
He went away, and I was fine. So I in doing watercolor in Italy, I did have a bird poop on my painting one time, and that ruined it. So I had to start all over. So you do not know bees, bugs, and hopefully no snakes, no critters come and bother you. Right now, I need to do what is in the background. So I kind of like that sky. It just happened. Let's do. This, by the way, is a little praying watercolor set, and I do like traveling with my little praying set, and I always recommend it for beginners, and simply because paints are quite expensive. I want you to have the best paper, the best paint, the best brushes you can possibly have, but I do know to begin with that it sometimes is important to be practical with what you can afford to go with. Some of you might have these watercolor pencils, and whatever materials you have to work with is what you should play with and enjoy the process, because it is you can do the same things that I'm basically doing by working with the material that you happen to have. Now, the reason I went ahead and put in that background is because we're really going light to dark, and that is always the best strategy. I build on these colors so that they have that sense of keeping the lights of the paper. Sometimes I go, gosh, I wish I'd kept it a little lighter right in here.
What colors are you using for the greens?
This is what I call a yellow and a green, because I'm working out of this little praying set. But to tell you the truth, Paula, if I were picking out of my really nice watercolor set, right, I would use a Aurelian yellow, and I would use a Viridian green, and I'd use a burnt sienna, and that way I'm toning down that very bright color. I also like a yellow green that's called Skip's green, and I use that quite often. So that's when I mix the yellow and I mix the green together, I make essentially a lighter green. And also in the beauty of watercolor is putting water with it and keeping it as light as possible. I'll do a lot of building up with this, and there are going to be some strokes that I need to make using this nice flat brush, like with the palmettos. And again, it needs to have, I'm just adding a little water because that's a little heavy, but the point of these, no pun intended here, the point of these palmettos is that they do branch, they do come out in these wonderful little strokes, and then I'll come back in and do some negative painting with all the darks, and that will make that simple. And so we're just sort of suggesting palmettos. We're making a little language here that says these are palmetto shapes, and we're adding to the texture of the overall landscape. Now, this back piece of grass is really pale and very yellow. And remember that pale yellow is going to get much paler looking when I darken the background where I need to, and also here. So this area is kind of brown. It has some, I'm putting in some green to start with because I'm making an artistic decision. Do I want to put all those leaves on the ground, or do I want to turn this back into grass, which is growing underneath all those leaves? And to represent grass, my best approach is a dry brush effect that has some texture in it eventually. And this is going to have some beautiful shadows in the foreground, which I will deal with later. So let's get some color on the tree, and we'll start building from there. I use a blue and a brown. That's my, if it were cobalt blue and burnt sienna, those would be my two choices to make a beautiful gray. If you have a lot of blue, it's more of a cooler gray. If you have more of a brown, it's more of a warmer gray. So right now I'm just sort of trying to build these trunks. I will add some smaller branches. I will get much darker for this tree, but it's got some wonderful texture. That's why, and I won't capture all of it, but we're inspired by what's in front of us. Here's what I say. Look for the lights and the shadows. Unfortunately, we're not getting that morning light that I saw the first time I painted this tree, but I'm getting an afternoon light, and so this tree is totally in shadow. Those are some happy dogs.
Art critics.
So now I will begin getting a little darker. So I take the same blue and the same brown. And hey, fellas.
Maybe it's your hat. Not yours. Jim's.
Did I mention that when you're out in nature, anything can happen when you're painting plein air? So this is quite typical. The other thing is people will come up and watch you paint, and they will ask you questions, and that's okay too. I was painting, I love to work outside, but I was doing a building one time when my mother rode by in a car, and she beeped and waved, and later she said to me, she said, "Cathy, you're the most stuck-up person I ever, you don't even look up. Your mother rides by and waves at you." And I said, "Mother, if I looked up every time somebody beeped and waved while I'm painting outside, I wouldn't get anything done." So
That's not working. Which is worse, a silent snake or what size brush are you using there?
this is a 1/2 inch flat, and it's a cheap Joe's. These are my two little rounds. I think both are 4. One's a 3, one's a 6, and one's a, oh, they're both 6. So yes, I like my 4s and my 6s and my 1/2 inch brush.
So is this kind of a dry brush? Is that how you get that to look like that?
It is exactly dry brush. Now, I could at this point switch. This allows me to do the dry brush better. And to get the dry brush, you just don't need as much paint on your brush. But here I can even layer. Hey, I think that almost worked. Do it again.
Let's get the dog treats in their pocket that they smell.
I think they'll go away eventually, hopefully.
All right, so I did add a little more texture, and now I can go with the smaller brush, the round brush. They're dying down just a little.
One left. Oh, good.
So I thought what I would do is a little more texture, a little more shadow, rather, and get some darks going with the tree. is this is against, and the blue. You know what we might do right now is get started, and then I can come back and maybe do a quick little 5-minute detail of how I finish up. But see, already that's defining the shape here. Let me just show a little bit more with some of the branches. And I do stick my brush in the water, come back to my gray wash. And if I'm making little tiny branches through the tree, from the tree itself, I allow some of these things to go behind or in front, and then there is going to be some foliage even in the background here. All right, so I keep working with darkening. Now let me put some darks in with the palmettos and a little bit. This is putting blue into my brown green color, so that I have the shapes that I want to make are kind of the negative of underneath where this is working. Plus, some of these are going to be dark. Another trick I like is putting purple and green together to make a really nice dark. Let's see. Purple and green. It makes a really nice dark green. I'm kind of working through some of that dark I just applied to stretch this paint and develop a little more darks and lights with that. And as I bring it down to the grass, I even texture my strokes so that it looks like I have a little edge of grass here. And I'm going to do some more wispy little strokes in the dark here with a darker green. I still need a couple more levels of this green coming through here to work out what's going on in this background. I do this little thing where my background should have more blue in it because it's a receding color. The yellow green, although I have some yellows here, and I do need some yellows because of the colors I see, I need to keep this the brighter and this the cooler. But if I observe where darks are in this background and yet what's going on here, and this is how I work the background in behind foreground. So where these palmettos were sketched and painted, then I have to work that background in around that. And it requires some negative painting with my brush and a contrast that really does say this is foreground and this is the background. Okay, now when I'm not finishing something, I tend to sort of push it here, but you can already see that that could get darker, but it does help to bring those shapes forward, and that becomes that background shape. Okay. And this goes very dark. I happen to have some dark over here from left over from the last time I worked on this little set. And let's put some of that in. And again, if I want this to look like grass, even way off, I just let that happen there. Now I wanted this to be even darker, as though this were a lighter shape coming in right here. So this forms that edge, and I'll just take my flat brush and move this up here with more of the lighter green color. And I should begin to define shapes of these trees that are back here, and whatever goes behind this tree over here should appear over here. Is what I call the dog's tail. If the dog's head is on one side, the tail has to be on the other side.
Very appropriate.
Yes. I'm so glad they decided not to voice their opinion anymore, but thanks for your patience. Oh my goodness. All right, so this is getting everybody started, and I think that toward the end, if we're all in this area, I could show you just a little bit more about adding even more branches, a little more detail, possibly putting in little foliage up here. There's so much out here. You have to kind of pick and choose. So here's my advice. Sketch your tree, work with a background, do some wet and wet, get some dry brush. Just keep layering until you have what you like with detail. The most detail should be in this foreground. So I'm going to do a few finishing touches, and I might not get it completely finished, but let me show you a bit more. As I started to look up into the tree itself, there's a lot of foliage that you can see back behind the trunk and these branches. There's also green across the top and over some of these branches, so I can simply use some of that paler yellow green to move across it. This is a dry brush technique that I'm using. I do wet my brush, I do put the paint on, so here I'm mixing the yellow and the green together with a touch of brown, so I'm not too bright with my green, and going with this dry brush into the background. Now I can do branch leaves coming off of some of the branches and back behind the trunks of the trees. Let's put in a sense of middle value here, and then I'll come in with some light and some more dark. So I do see a lot of sky holes through there. And remember, this is an impression of painting from nature. It's almost like doing an impressionistic painting, because I'm not getting everything in great detail, but I'm trying to get the feeling of what this tree and its foliage and surrounding area has. So dipping my brush again into the water, using a little more yellow and making this a yellow green. I'm going to try to get some lighter colors in here and blending a bit. Now I want to go back to my darker blue-green and pushing a few darks through the foliage of the tree. And this way, it's like there are lights and shadows, even as the sun rays come through the back of this tree. And actually, this seems to be filled in with a much darker color. And also see some nice branches coming in here. But I like the fact that there are little indications of individual leaves just by dabbing with the paintbrush. And so this could go on for maybe 20 more minutes. But again, it's hard to do a finished painting in 30 minutes, which is usually what I take for 20 to 30 minutes for a demo. But it does take about 2 hours to sit out here and to really see everything and to paint everything. to what I would do to kind of finish up this area and this area, which is next. And
do the shadow.
I am going to do, and thank you for that, because I would really miss out if I didn't show you some more things with the shadows. This gets quite dark, and I love to put in the darks. I think that that's as important in your work if you create a range of value, something that says this gets really dark with the foliage that's back here. And again, I want to create the sense of leaves, and where one shape is in front of another shape. So I keep pushing my darks and my lights. The lights are pushed by putting more darks in, because remember we started with the lights first, and the lights are going to really start popping when the darks move to give that impression. Now I wanted to show you something I sometimes do when I just soften up some of the dark spots that I made there. Let's do some lines in the blue-brown for the trunk of the tree that we use for the trunk of the tree. And although I do want to put some more texture over the trunk of this tree, I want to do some linear lines that say, the grain of what's going on here. At the bottom, there are little areas where the tree has very distinct shapes as it moves into the ground, and that's very obvious. It's those shadowed places, and this is one of our most distinct shadowed place here with the trunk of that. And I'm actually seeing some light now falling on the top of that tree. Oh, this could take another 30 minutes just putting in all of this, but there's a little bit more texture. And at this point, I also want to do my lines for the limbs and stems. I saw some limbs coming down here and some more stems here. Oh my goodness, they go on. And I remember that all of these branches do go out of the composition. They go out of your paper. Okay, more dry brush is needed. Now, the foreground and your shadows. I wanted to put a little more yellow-green into this foreground, but I'm also seeing a lot of brown. Let's use that flat brush. That works a little better. This has, I wanted more yellow. I wanted more yellow because I wanted this to be bright. I also wanted some texture of this foreground and to look like grass. And I have to let that dry before I start putting in some shadows. There's also a little brown, and the brown, sticking my brush in water, picking up a little more brown. Burnt sienna is the color I love to use for brown. And because there are some leaves across here, I need to suggest that touch of brown in here. A little more brown can even be integrated into the trunk of the tree. In some of those shadowed places. Need to get darker here anyway. I wanted the tree to read as a gray tree, but it does have blue and brown in it. Now, the sidewalk here is a blue. It's a asphalt. And I just take a little bit of the blue with some water and put that in as the path over it's sort of a cement path. It could read as water, but it's not water. And I'm going to go a little browner over here. And for my shadows, I'm going to go back to my round brush, and I want a blue, dominantly blue with a little bit of brown in for my shadows. And the tree over This is called glazing when you do a wash over an area, and preferably when it is totally dry. The shadow from this tree is moving in this direction, and what we have are the many branches that branch off from that tree. So we're getting the feeling here of the tree shadows, and we also have a lot of that color here on the ground underneath the palmetto, and I see shadows that go in the background, more blue than brown. You notice that sometimes I have to keep mixing my little puddles. All right, so what we have here is the horizontal kind of shapes from the trees that are back here that create shadow, little shadow patches. And over here, this is pretty solid, but I'm going to let some of the light show and just give it a bit there. All right, so this area is getting more finished. Obviously, I'm not quite through in this area. I need to do a little more texture here, but voila, this is more finished. All right,
Okay.
enjoy.
Thank you, Kathy. Now let's walk around and see what all these artists, these budding artists, are doing. Okay, Larry. Oh, sorry, I wasn't supposed to say names. Thank you, Larry. That's great. Oh, I love it. I love to see everybody.
This is a beautiful sketch
Oh,
right here.
look at
Isn't it
that.
nice? Yes, it is. And she's got her palmetto. Her green is a beautiful green. We've got other sketches here, and look at that's very nice drawing.
Yes,
And look at the beautiful
Oh,
texture.
look at
happening.
Madonna, that's great. You've got
Scramble.
Here, that's even better. We can see it from that direction.
Scramble.
So Marie has this tree plus another one going too. And see, also has a beautiful design. Neil, let's see what you have. That's very nice.
Oh, see, that's good.
Beautiful tree.
Thank you.
Oh, she's
It's
done
nice
two.
to be outside.
Awesome.
Good to be outside. Yeah.
Yes. That's great.